All right, welcome to the Week 3 Forum. Last week we learned about some of the constitutional principles that structure American government. This week we have an entire chapter devoted to the idea of federalism, which, as I mentioned in the overview, is sort of a system of negotiated sovereignty. In a federal system of government, the national or federal government enjoys exclusive control over some issues, which we call enumerated powers, and areas in which the state governments enjoy a great deal of control, or in some instance exclusive control, which we call reserved powers. And then there are issues over which the federal and state governments share powers, which we call concurrent powers. Other countries have federal systems as well, and those countries include Canada, Germany, India, and Australia, just to name some of the prominent examples. One question that comes to mind: why did the framers adopt such a complex system of government? Part of the answer is that necessity is the mother of invention. In the framers' experience, there was really only two options: a monarchy, which they had rejected with the Revolutionary War, certainly a British monarchy, which they considered to be foreign control, or a confederation, which they had originally adopted with the Articles of Confederation and which had been proved to be unworkable. So consequently, they created a hybrid system of government in which the central government had a good bit of power, but that there was also influence retained by the states, largely because, again, in 1787, most citizens thought of themselves as New Yorkers, Virginians, and South Carolinians. The idea of Americans didn't exist. At least, and the framers understood that at the time. The idea of a person being an American first really doesn't come around until very late in the 19th century. So federalism as a principle of government can be viewed, again, metaphorically as both a sword and a shield. As a principle, federalism helps to shape the battlefield. In other words, everyone is a federalist when they don't want the central government to be doing something. So when you say it's a sword, you're basically saying the federal government has to centralize. They have to take authority. We can't leave it to the states. When you're using it as a shield, you're basically saying, no, let the states do it. Let the states take responsibility. They're the laboratories of democracy. Now, of course, that's the reality. And that's the metaphor that we talk about a lot, the idea that states can be the laboratories of democracy. They can experiment with policy. They know their people best. The converse of that, though, is that if states can be the laboratories of democracy, they can also be the laboratories of tyranny. And that's something that we have discovered over the course of our history. The cake metaphor is often useful for understanding how the practice of federalism has evolved over time. Up until the Great Depression, the general approach to federal-state relations was, again, what we would call a layer cake, right? Where the federal government effectively had no constitutional authority to intrude into issues that fell within the state's reserved powers. The Great Depression changed all that. Franklin Roosevelt campaigned in 1932 in the midst of the Great Depression on a platform of a New Deal. And over the course of the 1930s, more and more power accrued to the federal government to combat the effects of the Great Depression. So instead of a layer cake, you now have a marble cake, with the federal government increasingly using its expanded taxing and regulatory authority to override the preferences of elected officials of state and local governments. So as you think about Chapter 3, think about, again, the complexity of operating a system of government where the rules governing the interactions between the federal and state governments are subject to change. And then, you ask yourself, who should be in charge, right? Should the states do most of the work, knowing that the states have vastly different levels of wealth and resources? Or should the federal government do most of the work, knowing full well that the direction, that direction lies potentially in authoritarianism? So again, like last week, I want to hear from you. What part of this chapter did you find most interesting? What part of this chapter did you think is most important? What part of the chapter do you have the most difficulty with? And that's really the part I want to talk about, because when you guys let me know what you're struggling with, I can tap in and help you out. Okay, if everybody's going along in the forum and saying, it's all cool, I got it, I got this, Well, I'm going to assume you got it, right? You have to know what you don't know and what you're struggling with. If you know and you can tell me and express to the class, then I can help you, okay? So let's have a great week and learn a lot.